I want you to tell me the story of the K and the Q language, because if I recall correctly, this is the programming language that you have often quoted to me as being one that was sold for some ridiculous large sum of money, or that it was the highest price per the most dollars per byte of program sold, or something like that. You said.
Yes, you are correct. Like 80%. So
okay. That's about as much as I want to be correct. I don't want to be more right than that, because that means I spent too much time researching the thing. I only ever want to be 80% correct. So tell me more.
So this is true. At some point way back, I want to say probably in our first 10 episodes, closing in on 100 here, which is pretty crazy. It doesn't feel like we've recorded 100 episodes. But yeah, in our first 10, I think I mentioned at some point that basically Arthur Whitney, the individual behind many, many programming languages, A+, K, K1, K2, K3, K4, K5, K6, K7, K9, and
okay,
Q.
Okay, hang on just for a second. What all those K languages you just listed,
mm-hmm.
Are those evolutions of the same language?
No.
Okay, all right. I assume we'll hear more about that later, but continue.
Well, I can quickly, because I had the exact same thought. I actually met with the last flight I took before the pandemic was not actually to Prague, which was in February of 2020. It was to New York at the tail end of February in 2020, and that was to meet
and
with...
I can't be upset, listener, about this trip, because I did not live in New York at the time.
This is true. Very true. But yeah, I flew to sort of meet with Arthur Whitney and got to have a bunch of conversations with him and a dinner with him. And at one point, I didn't even ask a question, but I said something about Ks just being like, versions of each other or evolutions, similar to many other, languages. You could even say C++ with the different versions, etc. And he corrected me and said they're not, evolutions of the same. Or I'm not sure if evolution. I use the word evolution. I'm not sure what he would say to that, but he said they're definitely not versions. It's not like K3 was an upgrade from K2. They are complete rewrites from scratch. Every single time Arthur creates a new language, he deletes, like straight up deletes. You can't go and find the old executables for K5, 6, and 7 unless if you happen to have downloaded it in the past. And maybe you can find them in the corner of some internet. He just like wipes it off of his computer and then starts from scratch, writing a parser, lexer, etc. And admittedly, takes what he, there's the quote that, now that I've finished programming this project, I can go back to the beginning and do it the right way because, you learn.
Okay, but what if you were using the older version of the K language?
So there are going to be a number of listeners that listen to both the Raycast and ADSP that are going to have strong thoughts on this, because this is a question that I've asked the K community. Literally just within the last month, maybe a month ago, I went to the APL Farm, which is a Discord that has channels for all the different sort of Iversonian array languages: J, BQN, K, Nial. I'm not sure if did I miss them all? APL, BQN, J, K, and Nial, I think, are the 5 main ones. And I went to the K. I don't spend much time in the K channel because it's one of the array languages that I know the least about. And I asked, what is like the state of K? Because every time Arthur starts on a new K, he just like deletes everything off his computer and starts anew. And if you're wondering why did they skip K8, that's because
I was wondering that. I was about to ask what happened to K8.
Do you have a guess? I know some of our listeners that work at Google.
Isn't
that
know. Like the acronym for like Kubernetes or
exactly? Yeah. So they didn't want to step on the toes of Google, even if it would have been fine because no one cares. So they and some people say that they kind of wanted to get to K9 because it's whatever, cute. But
woof. Oh yeah. Wait, hang on. I gotta. you continue. I gotta get my dog.
I'll continue talking. Yes. So every time Arthur starts a K, he starts a new one, which sort of leaves the prior K in a state of limbo. And so it's unclear to me what K is the most popular K or the most widely used, or if someone's going to start learning K, what should they start learning? So the most recent, you might say, Oh, the most recent one is obviously the most recent one, but there's always a stage where it's sort of in development. And the current K9, is kind of been branded Shakti, and there's been a database in a company. Or do you want to have a woof woof break for Looney? Hey, Looney.
Can you say K9 again?
K9. And that kind of got picked up. Looney and I got to meet in New York. You'll hear about that in our New York recap episode, which apparently we need more time for in the future. But yeah, so
K9.
Every K gets abandoned at some point. And so of the Ks, in my mind, your options are K4, because that's the K that went on to become Q. But the problem is that the company that bought KX, the company, which is the company that owned K4 and Q, doesn't have documentation for K4. And apparently there's some command that you have to turn on in order to enable K4. So K, similar to J, is an ASCII-based array language. So your functions and your operations are single ASCII characters. But when First Derivatives, the company that bought KX, bought the company...
Single ASCII? You mean combinations of ASCII characters?
No, single... I think there are certain digraphs, which is two ASCII characters together, but most of the functions and operations are single ASCII characters, which means... I think on one of the ArrayCast episodes, it was either Stephen Apter or Joel Kaplan said, what is Arthur's main motivation for designing...
hang on, I'm sorry. This is blowing my... Are you allowed to define a function that has a multi-character name?
Oh, yes, correct. Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Yes. Actually, I don't know much about K, so I could be wrong, but I'm 99% sure that is the case. But all of the built-in functions that come with the language
that makes more sense.
Are ASCII characters.
That makes more
Similar
sense.
to how all the built-ins in APL are Unicode characters.
Okay.
But to finish my last thought, Joel or Steven, whichever one it was, said, Arthur's main motivation for designing K and his prior array languages is the keyboard. Because it's what is available to you on the keyboard in terms of symbols. Is what you can use. Anyway, so the point, I'm going on a long-winded thing of what is the state of K? It's a question I asked, and in my mind, it's K4, the language behind Q. The problem with that is that it's not documented on the KX website where you can learn about Q. Q is very well documented, just not K. And Q is the wordified version. So whereas, slash is sort of a reduction in K, the wordified version of that is over. And the backslash, which is a scan, the wordified version of that is scan. Anyway, so instead of ASCII symbols, KX and Arthur put sort of words on it. That became Q. And then for a long time, K7 looked like it was going to be sort of the K for the end of all times. And there was wikis built around that K, and there was a big community. But then when K7 sort of got ended, and then K9 showed up, the K7 community, I think... I don't know really what the state of it is. So now there's K7, which at one point had a big community around it. K4, which is behind Q.
But a community that ended because this guy unilaterally decided, oh no, this thing that you're using, I'm going to delete it and build a better one.
Yes. And so I don't think Arthur listens.
This is an interesting software governance model.
I don't think Arthur listens to this, and if he does, or this reaches his ears somehow, I don't want this to come across because I have a huge amount of respect for Arthur.
No, the man is a genius. I have a huge amount of respect for him because you have a huge amount of respect for him. Yeah. I'm just as somebody that comes from a more traditional software community, I just don't I'm just trying to understand. It sounds really out there to me, but I'm sure that for folks in the community and for Arthur that there's good reasons and probably makes sense. It's just I don't understand it yet.
So the reason I was prefacing I have a lot of respect is because I'm about to say something that's kind of critical. It's not for anything you said, it's for what I'm about to say. And that's that I think the biggest problem with the K languages is that is what Arthur does. He basically starts anew, and then you end up with this language that is better than the prior ones. But not only does he sort of delete everything off his computer and then, to a certain extent, whether abandon is the right word to use, abandon the community, he also infamously does not like to give interviews and does not like to document sort of the history of things. So I have this, I'll link it in the show notes, and I can even read a little bit of it.
So we'd never get him on the podcast.
No, we've asked on a Raycast. I mean, there's a chance that like in the right sort of setup, he might be willing to give an interview. Like, I'm not writing it off, but like we've definitely extended the offer.
But you haven't explained why. Like,
why?
If the language is like, yes, why does he delete and then start over?
I mean, if you gave a lot of people the opportunity to do that with their software projects, there was a ton of people that, given the resources and time, would definitely say, yes, let's do it. I mean, I think there's always the adage of like, people underestimate how much work it is to do a rewrite. And so I'm sort of put that aside. I realize that it's a ton of work, but like, how many people, if you ask them, if you had the ability to go back and do it over again, do you think you could do it better? Would that be something you're interested in? Like, a ton of folks would say yes to that. And Arthur has the means to do that. Like, he's a brilliant, probably one of the top end developers in the world. He basically does, I think, most of the work on his own. He's responsible for one of the fastest languages in the world. His company that he sold for $100 million in two different installments, once in 2013 and then fully in 2018. And people like the banks that use Q and KDB Plus, which are sort of the database and wordified version of K that he built, pay $1 million a year to use the language. And like almost every, like when I asked like how many firms on Wall Street use this to someone that I met with in New York, he said almost everyone. Like it is like the go-to language. And so like Arthur built this incredibly powerful tool where performance was the only thing that mattered, and people put up with the terseness and the fact that it was ASCII symbols, and if you put some expression it looks crazy, because the people that were purchasing it don't care about programming languages and what it looks like. They care about making money on Wall Street, like, and doing real-time things that need to be done extremely quickly.
Is it statically compiled?
It's interpreted.
It's interpreted?
Yes, which shocks a lot of people. People say interpreted languages can't be fast because when people hear about interpreted languages, they think about Python. But if you write an incredibly, fast, I don't even know what goes into K. I don't want to start saying things.
Do you know how it's compiled? Does it compile down to a bytecode or what?
I think it's just a single sort of executable. It's written in C, very
low
level code.
I mean, like you say, it's interpreted, but does it compile the language to a bytecode that then gets run through some bytecode interpreter, or? I
do not know, but I don't think
that's
not
more or less how
like
something like Python, those like .pyc files that get left behind are the bytecode compiled.
If my understanding is correct, and I'm sure we have a number of listeners that will immediately correct me, feel free to DM me or comment on a Twitter thread or open up a GitHub issue. It's just that each of the primitives have like some specialized code for all the different types, and it's able to recognize quickly if you're operating on some kind of matrix or some kind of time series. And so whenever you invoke some operation, it is able to figure out the type quickly and then dispatch to that statically compiled operation, like previously compiled. So like it is interpreted, but is essentially just ends up invoking specialized, very, very fast code. But I could be wrong about that. Like I don't.
But that's how the built-ins work.
Yes.
Okay.
Anyways, so why? I mean, he sold the company and I think even before he was working on K, he did very, very well at Morgan Stanley when he was building A and A+, which were basically predecessors to K, and those were called APLs, just basically like ASCII versions of APL, which he had learned originally when he worked for IP Sharp and Associates. And yeah, like, so if you go to this history of K page, it says that Arthur Whitney left IP Sharp and Associates in 1992 to create a new language. This was formed, they formed KX Systems, and K2 and K3. K2 and K3 were first commercially developed and supported versions of K made at KX Systems. K3 came with a complete reference manual that consisted of documentation. KDB Plus was a database system that was sold along with K that provided an in-memory database manageable by K. K4 was released in 2000, it actually says 200, so it's missing a zero. In 2003, along with K4, Q was released as a wrapper around K, providing readability. K4 is the current commercial dialect supported by KX Systems, which is bundled alongside Q. K4 requires a command to switch from K to Q, and the documentation at code.kx.com does not cover K4. And then Shakti, which interestingly now says K7, K9. It was my understanding that the branding of Shakti didn't come out until K9, but maybe they have retroactively sort of included K7. And it says Arthur Whitney sold the majority of his stake in KX Systems in 2018 and departed along with a few of his associates to create the new company called Shakti, along with which came the creation and development of the K7 and K9 dialects. K7 was maintained for a few years and is no longer available for use. K9 is currently nascent and, as per on-site claims, supports fast processing of tables with row numbers in the billions and trillions. Binaries for K9 are available at Shakti.com. So, and yeah, when I asked the K channel on the APL Discord, what's the state of K, I got sort of varying answers of, I'm learning K6. You can find a bunch of open source implementations of the different Ks. So there's Kona, there's OK, but these are all just implementations by individuals, not the actual executable that was released by Arthur when he was developing it. Because, like I said, he deletes them after he's done using them. And yeah, I mean, I find K incredibly, the story of K and Q and Arthur.
So these are not open source. So when you say he deletes them, like, you mean he deletes like his source and he deletes the binary, or he just deletes his source?
That is my understanding, and then that's what he told me, and then that's what he's told many people.
Wow.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, so if you're wondering, sort of, if you listen to a Raycast, why do I like APL? I talk about APL and BQN. Those are probably my two favorite languages. I created this Venn diagram, which I'm sure a few of our listeners that follow me on Twitter have seen, of sort of the delineation between array languages and Iversonian languages. And then also there's a circle for combinator languages, and K and Q don't really have support for combinators. And that's like 50% of what I love about array languages. So in order to do a lot of the things that I can do in APL and BQN, and even J has rich support for combinators as well, I can't replicate that code in Q and K.
What has made these array languages, this K family, so much more successful than, is it more successful than other array languages?
Well, so actually, I released, we're going back, we're hopping in. If you don't listen to a Raycast, I'm just keep on bringing up things that have been mentioned there. But so there was 2 meetups that happened, one in Toronto, one in New York, and that was the reason, Bryce and I got to meet up, was because I was down there for this meetup. And I released the presentation of that, the re-recording, on YouTube. And one of the comments I got was, why would you learn Q? Because I was including Q in my it was a comparison of 7 different array languages, and I added Q at the last minute for the YouTube recording version. And this comment was, why are you covering Q? It's a proprietary language that you need to hand over your email to use, and only then you get a version that has limited cores. You have to limit your cores to 2 or 4 or something like that. And I said, and then I basically linked to this history page, and I said, or I linked actually to a GitHub repo that tracks the number of companies that are using array languages. So J, APL, and K and Q and KDB plus. And I tallied it. There were 21 using APL and 25 using K, Q, or KDB plus, and which is all the same thing. Just people write it down differently. So 4 more than were listed, and obviously this is not an exhaustive list.
Okay, so but I'm gonna let's just go on the premise that K is successful, because from everything I've heard, it sounds like it is. Why?
Perf. That would be my one-word answer. I don't think APL, and to say that people that use APL don't care about perf is, I don't think, true in all cases.
That's interesting. So that sort of means that, for me to really understand this, you're the wrong person for me to talk to. I need to talk to somebody who understands how this thing is so fast.
I mean, I'm not sure how many people in the world know how K is so fast, because there's only one person that works on the source code, and that's Arthur Whitney.
Yeah, but no, people must have figured out a bit about how this thing operates.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, yeah. I'm not sure how many of the Wall Street folks that are using K and Q. I mean, we can get on. I met up with the individual that uses K. We can invite him on. And I mean, we're also supposed to have Marshall on. I said a while ago.
We're supposed to have a lot of people on, and we don't always deliver on that. But I find it interesting that if the differentiator is performance, my guess would be that it's not just that. It's not just in the implementation. There must be aspects of the K language that make it easier to compile, to interpret efficiently, as opposed to other languages.
I think that the way it's implemented, it's like the executable is incredibly tiny. I mean, I think it's larger now, probably.
But what I'm saying is that no, I'm suggesting that the design of the language, this need for performance has probably influenced the design of the language. Like if APL has been around for a long time, if people could make a faster APL, they probably would have, right?
I don't agree with that. No.
Why not?
I think so. There will be people that disagree with me. I've said this statement to several people. Some people have completely agreed. Other people would say that's not the case at all. So just let it be said that varying opinions on this statement. But originally, APL was not a programming language. It was a notation for teaching. Yeah. And that's what Ken Iverson, the person that created the notation, it was called Iverson notation, cared about. He cared about being a tool for teaching. That's why his paper, when he won the Turing Award in 1979, was called Notation as a Tool of Thought. And it's my impression from all the papers that I've read about Ken and his work with education is that he actually didn't care about performance. It doesn't mean he didn't necessarily think it was important at the end of the day, but like when he was designing J and designing APL, he was thinking about how this affects the way people think, not about how fast is this going to run. And because of that, a large percentage of the array language community when it comes to APL and J don't care about perf. They care about it as a desktop calculator that can do way more than just, integer arithmetic, but can do stuff with, CSV files. And if you need to do something super quickly, it's, a super good quote unquote tool of thought tool. That being said, I think there are people that do care about perf, and I think Dialog APL has done an incredible amount of work optimizing idiom recognition and stuff. But to say that someone could just, if someone could create a faster APL, it would have been done. I don't, because I agree, except that it wasn't done, other than maybe like the APL that we're talking about is K.
Perhaps it wasn't done because of things inherent to the design of the language. Like you're acting as if the language of APL and the language of K are just like interchangeable things, and if the design of the language has no impact on like performance, the design of the language definitely has impact on performance. Now, I'm just not qualified to tell you what different design decisions in K versus APL has performance impacts, because I just don't know enough about those languages.
Well, I do know that one of the things that Arthur is famous for saying is there's no operation in the language that's 10 times slower than any other operation. So every operation is within an order of magnitude, because in the past, there's been attempts to write high-performant APL machines. I'll link it in the show notes if people want to read about it. But they implemented these extremely fast primitives, but when you ran whole programs, the primitives would be really fast, but you'd spend 99% of your time in this operations that weren't critical.
How does APL differ from K?
Well, the number one thing is one's Unicode, one's ASCII, but you can kind of ignore that.
Yeah.
The second thing is that and I'm sort of, once again, people can correct me. I'm not a K.
And for the record, I don't think that the choice of Unicode symbols for APL syntax, I do not believe that has any real impact on the speed with which you can interpret the program.
Probably not, but in line with what I said earlier about Ken, it does impact the tool of thought, which is why I bring it up, because it's much harder for an ASCII symbol to be visually representative or mnemonic, is that how you pronounce that, of the operation than it is for a Unicode symbol that's like tailored.
Yeah.
The second thing is that K and Q don't have true higher dimensional arrays, and they also don't have a rank operator. They do have the concept of rank, but I think the primary data structure is an array, but also second to that is something called a table, I believe, or dictionary. I'm going to mess up what it's actually called, but it's more of a hash map of vectors where each of the values is a vector that doesn't necessarily have to have the same length. And so you do a lot more with hash maps than you do in other array languages because hash maps don't exist in other array languages. So things like querying and the database. So that's the other thing is KDB plus, the K language and Q language come with an incredibly powerful database. And I think it specifically has like a ton of functionality for time series stuff, which obviously if you're on Wall Street is stuff you want to do. And there is a database that comes with J called JD, I believe, which is kind of supposed to be in the similar vein as what KDB plus does. But yeah, in APL, there are databases, FlipDB, stuff like that, but like nothing that was built like tailor-made for high-frequency Wall Street stuff. So the existence of dictionaries, and also too, I've talked to a few people, Michael Higginson, who just won the APL professional tier of the APL contest, and another individual, and these folks have been telling me how like, you know, I need to learn more about K and Q so I can speak, because there's a bunch of stuff. Like I think one of the things that Michael mentioned, and I apologize, Michael, if I'm going to get this wrong, but he mentioned that you can have, well, so actually this is something I know for a fact that I didn't get from Michael's, that most of the functions in J, APL, BQN are limited to sort of two arguments, unary function and binary function. And when you want to have multiple arguments, I believe the idiomatic thing is to sort of chain them into a list of things and then destructure them. So really you've got unary and binary. Whereas in K, you can have any arity functions. They've got a syntax for basically a function, and then it's defined by braces, and then at the front of it, you put in brackets, and then you just separate with semicolons all of your arguments. So if you want to have a function with 5 arguments, you just go A, B, C, D, E. And you can do basically, and this is the thing that Michael told me, he says you can, I can't remember if it's called like modifying the valence, but if you basically want to do partial application to any of the arguments. So similar in C++ when we have, you know, bind front or bind last, or before we had those two, we had bind. You had those like _1, _2, you know, to place the placeholders for the variables that you would want to take from the return function. There's a super convenient syntax for that where basically you can do partial application for, so if you have a 5 argument function and you want to turn that into a 3 argument function with the first, third, and fifth arguments, that's super simple to do. You basically just like fill them in, and you have first class functions. That's another thing that K and Q have, whereas APL and J don't. They have first class functions, and so you can do.
Wait, APL doesn't have first class functions?
No, it has defuns, which are similar to lambdas.
A bit of an odd.
I mean, you got to remember APL was created in 1960. Well, first implementation was in 1966, and BQN, the newest Iversonian APL language, does have first-class functions and is much more functional in a number of ways. Yeah, we should either have some of the Q folks that I've talked to. We should bring on Michael, or I should go. I'm thinking. So here's. I was going to tease this on a Raycast, but
too late now.
I'll just say it here. I mean, I was gonna, but then I left it out. But I'm thinking about because we've been sort of on a break. My programming language is a virtual meetup for the last couple months since July, and I'm thinking about the next book just being a dictator and choosing it. Usually there's a vote, and making it Q for Mortals, which is a book that's on the KX website for learning Q. Once I get through that book, I'll be much more informed. Will I know how the implementation and why the language is so fast? I'm not sure. But yeah, we're at like the, I don't know, 30-minute mark.
The brisket was at 166 when I last checked, which was about 2 minutes ago. You got until the brisket's at about 180, and then I really got to watch it.
Well, I mean, what else do you want to know about K/Q? I mean, we basically kind of covered it. ASCII language, dictionaries.
Well, okay, but you said you created some other languages.
Oh, yeah. Like, well, I mentioned A+. That was when he was at Morgan Stanley. He left. Well, actually, it says on this history page that Whitney left IP Sharp and Associates in 1992. I thought he left IP Sharp and Associates to go to Morgan Stanley, and then he worked at Morgan Stanley for a year. And then I thought actually maybe he even worked at another bank before he started KX. But regardless, he worked at a couple banks at some point, worked at IP Sharp and Associates, And when he was at the banks is when I thought he was working on A and A+. He also wrote a language called B, which is actually open source and online. I'll find a link to it, throw it in the show notes. And you'll get a taste for the style of C code, which is very similar to the way that J is programmed, which is open source, which is very, very macro heavy. I think when I was working on the J source code, trying to port it to C++, I measured and there was like 10,000 macros. So it's not like, oh, macros the way we use them in C, like they create macros for everything. And then you program in macros basically, like, for a dyadic or a monadic function, aka a unary function or a binary function. They have V1 and V2, and that's how you define a function that has one or two variables. For for loops, they've got, everything. So everything is a macro, and I think that's similar to how Arthur Whitney has designed his. And famously, there's something called the incunabulum, which is actually a word that means a book before it's a book or something. And it's called the J incunabulum. And Ken Iverson wanted Arthur Whitney to work on J with him when basically Ken decided we're done with APL, we're done with Unicode symbols. We've tried for 3 decades. Unfortunately, they didn't wait for like 5 more years when like Unicode became a thing. And so they switched to...
I do not think that Unicode becoming the thing would have substantially improved the likelihood of APL seeing widespread adoption.
We'll never know. But the point is that it's a lot easier.
The state of Unicode support in software in general in 2022.
That's because you're a C++ programmer.
No, it's not a C++ specific problem. The state of Unicode support just across software in general does not lead me to believe that the world, even today, is ready for a language that leans so heavily on Unicode.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair take. It's a fair take. But yeah, so when Ken was starting work on his new language J, aka APL 2.0, and even there's a presentation. I'm not sure if it's recorded and online, but I definitely know the slide deck is something, and I believe it's called APL ? Or something. And it's this presentation of this new quote unquote, it was called an APL at the time, but just not with Unicode symbols. And he was presenting it at an APL conference, and kind of everyone was like, whoa, you're calling this an APL? This isn't an APL, and, to the guy who invented the whole thing. Anyways, he went to Arthur to ask him to work on it. Arthur said, no, I've got my own plans, aka A+, K. Or at that point, maybe he had already done A and A+, and he was about to go on to K. But he went to this farm, and there's a Wikipedia page that explains this whole thing. And so even though he was telling Ken no, he said, I'll get you started. And he wrote this single page of J code. And that was basically the start of the J programming language. And it's called the J incunabulum, I believe is how you pronounce it.
Interesting. Why, okay, so he created A+, B, and why did he go to K? Like,
what's the name?
Alphabetically. Like, why?
Well, so A was clearly short just for A+, and array language love their single letter stuff. So APL was just a single letter version of APL, and then, A is a single letter of APL.
Yeah.
A+ is because they added a GUI to A, so A+ is just A with a GUI.
B follows pretty clearly, yeah.
But then C was taken.
Okay. What about D? Not taken at that time.
I don't think D was taken at the time.
What about E?
Yeah, I don't know about that, but so I think at that time J, actually I don't know if K got named first or J after, but the reason J was chosen was because when they were starting on the language and doing work, Roger Huey, the main implementer on it, was told to like get started or whatever, and so he just named the file. If you look at your keyboard, if you're sitting in front of a computer right now, which probably none of you are, what letter on your keyboard has a little thing that you put your index finger?
Oh.
The index finger is resting. So it was just the easiest letter to type. So he just saved his file as like j.c, and then that's what the name of the language became. Why K? I actually don't know. I don't, K comes after J, right? Oh boy,
the array programming language historian, a rare falter. All right, you look that up. I'm gonna check on the brisket. We are getting there. 171.3. This is great. great podcast content.
Whoa.
Silence.
I was going to say, I'm on the kaplwiki.com page, and it says, this does not answer the question, but I just learned something. K7, the first Shakti K, was the first K to have full Unicode support. Oh, that's not.
Wait, okay. So can we
Unicode
talk?
Characters.
So he sold. He creates this company. Then
Chris's
he sells,
company. Who's Chris?
No, he creates this company.
Oh, creates. Okay, yes.
Then it becomes big and popular. Then he sells it.
Mm-hmm.
Then he goes off and keeps making new K languages.
Yes, correct. I think he collected
40
million in like 2013, and
were the people at K who bought this company from him perhaps not thrilled about this?
Oh yeah, probably not. I mean, I have not talked to anyone directly at First Derivatives about like how do you feel about Arthur continuing to do exactly what he was doing before. But I would imagine that they would have probably been happier if he had just retired. Also, too, someone corrected me when I was in New York, said that it's not, Arthur didn't own 100% of the company, so he didn't. And he sold the company for $100 million, but there was obviously other shareholders and stuff, so he got a percentage of $100 million, which I said, does that matter? Like 40 million, 100 million. Yeah. Those two are the same number to me. And he was you're clearly not from the yuck, all right, Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed, and have a great day.